We're back with Captain K, and he's going to be now telling us about the last 3 years of his service, of his 20-year service as part of the Earth Defense Force. And he took us through the events that led up to a cataclysmic battle which devastated Forward Station Zebra after his 17th year of service when he was a Sergeant Major. And then he told us a little bit about being recruited into the Space Force or Air Force wing of Earth Defense Force. So why don't you just pick up where you left off last time, Captain K?
Sure. Well, it was both convenient and fortuitous in the sense that to say that I was feeling pretty tore up about losing, most everybody that I had spent the last number of years, in some case over a decade or more with, um, was pretty devastating. And so the idea that I wasn't going to have to go back to that, the idea that I would just get to move on to something else that I wanted to do was certainly the kind of bait that I was perfectly happy to take, and was perfectly happy to, in many ways, it allowed me to mentally and emotionally shelve that experience, shelve that trauma by really starting over in a completely different place in a completely different way, doing something completely different with a different uniform, doing a different job. Um, Obviously, going to flight school, then you get to be an officer, and then being an officer, which is very different, in the air, which is very different from being an enlisted person on the ground. And so it was really two different worlds of experience, which allowed, I think, my brain to physiologically separate itself from otherwise what would have been a really, really, really tough thing to just move on from if I had to sort of go back to doing what I was doing. I don't know that I could have managed to do that. So in that sense, it was fortuitous. In the other sense, that I had always wanted to fly since I was a kid. Being able to think the idea of being a pilot was, number one in my book. So I was readily eager to take that opportunity. Um, so pretty much instantaneously, without much further ado, I was shuttled off out of there to another medical unit where I was supposed to sort of, have some time to make sure that I was recovered, and a lot of kind of high tech therapies in which, it was like sit in this chair and we'll hook some electrodes to you and flash some things in front of your face. And I think pretty high tech stuff that was either meant to suppress emotional reactions from that kind of trauma, or maybe even in some cases try and resolve them in medical biological ways in which I was not mentally aware of, but was, obviously going to go in a physiological process in which I could feel a result of at least feeling better, in the sense of not feeling just this weight of devastation on my chest, which was the immediate, experience of losing everybody all at once. And so as that shifted, I was able to make that transition. But essentially, within a couple of weeks after being in the hospital again, it was off to a completely different location to do flight school and to go to officer candidate school, and which was about a 6-month process. And did that training, which was in some ways less intense and less rigorous than the training that I had done before. So in some ways, it was a kind of a cakewalk by comparison. Like if I had to compare, I mean, most of the people who were coming into the flight school, for instance, were a lot younger than me because they were coming in as, young pilots at the beginning of their military careers. And I was someone who was near the end of my military career who was coming into flight school. So most of them were quite a bit younger and were, pretty much fresh. And so to them, what was this pretty rigorous and difficult training process, I often just would go, wow, sorry, you guys are having a hard time or feeling like they're breaking your backs. I mean, wake me when the hard part comes. And so it was not too difficult as far as the mental or physical training was considered, because the previous training that I'd had to go through was much, much, much more fierce and rigorous, I think, because of the conditions of what you were just having to deal with on the ground being a whole different kind of in your face, personal, stressful, how you have to be ready to react to that, and what level of fear you have to be able to be used to, and what level of intensity you have to be able to be used to, versus even when you're close to something, there's a whole nother comfort when you're in a cockpit, because even though you're not that far separated from death, you feel like you are. You have the illusion that you're in this protective egg, in this protective shell that is somehow keeping you safe from everything around you. But the real laws of physics are that that shell is keeping you just barely safe from all of the things that are outside in space and the things that could hit you and harm you. And not to mention things that are trying to hurt you, but all of the things that could just accidentally, you could come across that could hurt you if they're out there. So but it does give you this mental feeling like you're protected because you're in this little eggshell somehow. I don't know how to describe that. So training was, I don't know, like I would expect any other rudimentary training process to be, and kind of like any others. And so a certain amount of briefings, a certain amount of classroom time, a certain amount of marching around time, a certain amount of simulator time, and then a certain amount of actually getting into the actual vehicles and flying. And they had, for the most part, we flew 3 different types of fighter craft and 2 or 3 different types of bomber class craft. I was never trained to fly like the large craft that that we flew from the moon to Mars in, for instance. That was some other kind of pilot training program, or pilots who flew those vehicles were not in our flight school. So what we were learning were mostly smaller military craft, 3 different fighter class, and two sometimes a third bomber class. Um, After 6 months, everybody graduated. You get salute, a little ceremony, get your bars. Was quite nice. It felt I felt really accomplished, like I'd actually really done something that I'd really always wanted to do, and I felt very proud. And so when I got shipped off to the Nautilus, which was there was an air wing called Blue and Gold 213, which when I looked at Blue and Gold, it seemed to have some reference to some Air Force designations, or that the Air Force uses that for something or another. So that would indicate to me that that was a program that was started by or somehow based on a framework of the United States Air Force. That's a guess, just based on it being called Blue and Gold. But those are what the air wings were designated in our section, and so we were, like what I said, Blue and Gold 213. And there were 4 air wings on the Nautilus at that time. They rotated, so it wasn't always 213 us and then the same 3 others. There were rotated a few others, and it was a lot of patrolling, where you're taking vehicles away from the main ship in order to sort of check a perimeter or cover a grid or a quadrant grid or something, and do patrolling maneuvers, looking for, scanning for any anomalous activity, or seeing if you're going to run into anything that might be hostile. Because if you do just kind of run into them, usually they're going to do 1 of 2 things, which is either try and run away or engage you right away, depending on who they are. So usually as soon as you run into something, you're going to know that it's either a foe or a friend, because a friend is going to hang out there and want to communicate or not necessarily want to do anything, but someone who is hostile is going to have 1 of 2 responses. They are either going to attack you, or they are going to run away very, very fast. So anything that runs away very, very fast, or anything that shoots at you, is then your job for the day to figure out what that is, and then how to report and respond to that. The vehicles were, I mean, I'm not going to, it would not at this time be appropriate nor behoove me to give too much of a technical explanation of these vehicles, not because I'm not allowed to, but because it has become clear to me that this is valuable proprietary information that I have. And I know some people who are interested in understanding this technology and understand the dollar value of it. And so I'm not just going to hand over deep technical information at this time, because that would not serve my interests over what this value might be to me personally. And I don't want to sound like too much of an opportunist about that, but they haven't been nice as far as dealing with my benefits, or what I've been left with. So socioeconomically, it's been a struggle for me, and I'm happy to take any technological information that I have to someone who wants to use it and apply it in a civilian manner to discuss that, and that could be valuable. So I won't say too much about it. But I have looked at enough manuals and looked under enough the hood that I could work out some details of it without being an engineer or a scientist on these machines, that could lead to some pretty quick advances in what we're talking about aeronautics and space vehicles. So,
I have two questions on what you've said so far. Just to clarify, firstly, you did your training, your training to basically join the air wing of the Earth Defense Forces. So, could you tell us where was that training located? Was it on
oh yeah,
Earth?
certainly.
And
That was back on Lunar Operations Command, and then after the about midway through, we transferred to a outer training system, which is on Titan. I want to say, yeah, it's on Titan, and then we did the last half of the training, which was more out, farther out into the solar system, out from Titan. So we started out kind of close on the moon, and then moved out to Titan and got a little farther out.
so on Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, basically
Right.
there's a base that is run by the Earth Defense Force, and
At least
including
one, yes, at least
at
one.
least.
I think there's probably several. There's probably a network of them, to be honest.
Mhm. And you mentioned the Nautilus. So is the Nautilus a kind of space carrier type craft where these three different types of fighters and three different types of space bombers are basically launched?
Correct. The designation would be EDFSS Nautilus, which stands for Earth Defense Force Starship Nautilus. And essentially, um, this class of vehicle is, you would call it more of the cigar shape as opposed to disc or other shape. So it's, there's a front and a long middle and then an end. The end is, the engine section and the propulsion section, which is an interesting combination of things, as I'm to understand. Since I wasn't an engineer and that wasn't really my section, and didn't have clearance to spend much time in that section. I can't say too much more than that, except that my understanding, it was a complex system of propulsion technologies that included a kinds of nuclear power, fission or fusion power, and a kinds of other newer technology powers, and sort of newer propulsion systems as far as electrogravitic propulsion drives or temporal space drives, as well as some traditional thrusting drive propulsion. So it was something that was designed to operate under a lot of different circumstances and to have, I think, backups in case certain things failed. So I think there were many options that the engineers and the officers piloting could have in case you run into any number of the problems that you could run into in space. Because obviously, if you're far enough away from anybody else, help might not be able to arrive soon enough, and you better be as prepared as possible. So it makes sense to me that they would have a multi-tiered, multi-technological system for their engine rooms. But that occupied probably about the end 25% of the vehicle. And then the main mid area of the vehicle was the crew quarters and the air wings. The air wings, the launch bays were all in the top of the vehicle, so the roof parts would essentially open up, and the vehicles would simply just lift up out of there and be able to take off and come back in and land right on the ceiling, and it would close right up again. And then about the bottom half of that again was all crew quarters, and some of the storage and supply areas, and then the front section is all command command personnel and the engineers and scientists and all of their sort of classified, compartmentalized areas where they're doing their work or their research or scanning using whatever technology they are using for whatever they're scanning for, which we don't necessarily get to know what that is, except based on our intelligence briefings on a daily basis on what we need to know we are looking for or not looking for that day when we're doing patrols.
How big overall was the Nautilus, and do you know where it was made and who it was made by?
Um, it was probably, gosh, I'd say the thing's easily half a mile long, more maybe, probably almost 3/4 of a mile long. It's a good distance. It's a good sized vehicle, very good sized vehicle, meant to carry a lot of people and a lot of vehicles. A lot of options are supposed to be on that thing.
And do you know who
Oh,
constructed it, how it was constructed, and where? Was it constructed in space
No,
or on Earth?
no, I do not. That was information that was not privy to us, and my asking that question was told that that was above my pay grade to know that information, so I didn't really ask again.
Mhm. And who actually ran this Nautilus? And actually maybe you can clarify because you've mentioned Nautilus class ships and the Nautilus. Was this the actual name of that ship, or was that the name of the class of ships?
Uh, that was the name of the ship. I believe the class designation of the ship was what do they call them? Uh, IG Highliner, which stands for Intergalactic Highliner. So IG designating it as having intergalactic ability as opposed to IS vehicles, which are intersolar, which have sort of solar system range activity. And anything that's classified larger is classified as an IG, and the classification of this class is called a Highliner, wherever they came up with that and whatever that's supposed to mean. But it was essentially a carrier, that's carrying a number of vehicles, smaller vehicles, bomber vehicles, and personnel to fly those vehicles mostly, as well as research teams and, again, scientists doing whatever they're doing with their interesting equipment up in the nose area that we're, again, not privy to, except based on what information they tell us we need to know on a daily basis.
So even though it's a class of ship that's designed for intergalactic operations, during the 3 years you were on it, it served basically within the solar system.
Correct. We were on solar system patrol that entire time, and essentially, was up to the communication between the captain and headquarters on where and what we were doing that day. And we really often wouldn't even get told. Sometimes, I mean, there were portholes and places to get a good look out the windows, and so if we passed close enough to something, you could, oh, there's Jupiter. We're near Jupiter. Then we'd know, where we were. But half the time, we wouldn't know where we were until we were out somewhere. Because once we're out flying in the vehicles, then you've got your own scanning equipment that tells you where you are in placement, so you're not lost. But as long as we're just flying around inside, we only get to know where we are when we need to know where we are.
Mhm. And the power supply of those fighter and bomber craft that you flew, how long did that last for? How long could you operate in space independently before you had to return to the Nautilus?
We had protocols that said that we were not supposed to be out more than 12 hours at a time because, by whatever parameters they felt that the environmental recycling system and the power supply was safe for all of that to operate, based on also what they figure is our amount of time that it's safe to keep us out there flying around in space that's safe at a time. Because there's an interesting discombobulating factor. Space madness, as it turns out, is a very real illness and sickness that can happen to people when they're out in space, and it really comes from your brain and your body, for some reason, really are psychologically attached to the ground. And so when you're just not where there's anywhere where there's no ground for a really, really long ways for too long of a time, you can get loopy. Your head can really just start to get swimmy, and you just start to think thoughts that aren't normal or regular. And it takes just putting your feet, even if it's on artificial gravity ground or inside a vehicle that you feel like there's a ground holding on to you, for your head to just come back into your center. So space madness can happen. So 12 hours was about the limit that they would want us to be out, but um, the manual said that in case of emergency situations or long mission situations, the vehicles were capable of operating for over 30 days at a time.
Mhm. And in terms of the fighters, how many? What was the crew of the fighter craft? How big was it? And the same thing for the bomber craft. What was the crew number and what was its size?
There were three classes of fighter craft, which, for whatever reason, they like to name after snake names. So there were Vipers, Cobras, and Rattlesnakes. Vipers are a single-person craft. Cobras are a two-person craft that carry two pilots, one who operates mostly as the pilot and the other who operates mostly the targeting systems of the weapon systems. And then the Rattlesnake, which does actually have a tail, a physical tail that whips like a wave, so that at high speeds and at long distances it mimics a wave phenomena instead of actually being a vehicle. So it's a type of camouflage that it uses. Um, And that is a 1 to 3 person vehicle, depending on how many people you need to put in it and for what mission that vehicle is attempting to do, and whether you need a just a pilot who can deliver a payload or do something simple, or whether you need something that's going to be complicated and you're going to need a pilot and a weapons operator if it's something that you know is going to be combatively complicated, or whether you're going to need a pilot and a weapons operator and a scanner operator, which that has the Rattlesnake also has some much more complicated scanning equipment, which can see and find objects in vehicles that are not in our regular space, that are out of phase and so forth, which can be hiding or moving in different rates of speed or different times, bubbles and things like that. That gets the physics of it gets really weird, and the scanning equipment is really, really sophisticated and able to pick up a lot of different variations of movement.
And as far as the bombers were concerned, what was their crew complements and their kind of sizes?
Right, that was something that I would be the least familiar with. So it would take me. Let me see if what I can recall. I pretty much only, as a actual pilot outside of school, only flew one type, which was called the Albatross, and the Albatross is a, I would call it again, sort of a delta black, or maybe almost a boomerang wing shaped vehicle, which is probably about 80 feet wide and only about 16 feet nose to tail, so fairly narrow in the middle, but it's not a lot of room is required for that. All of your payload bombs are in the wings. Your cockpit is obviously right in the center, and the propulsion systems are in the lower half of the vehicle, and a little bit behind you. And you have multiple elevators, we call them, which are the bottom, e.g. Floaters, and then you have your pushers, which are a few of the thrusters in the sides, which move you in a forward direction or push you in a backward direction, and could hold a number of, I mean, and again, okay, when we talk about a bomber, in this case, a bomb could be anything of which the ballistic and military engineers have come up with that can transform a type of energy from point A to point B in as big of a boom or as big of an effect, if it's not an actual explosion like an EMP or some other kind of radiation effect, as big of an effect in as small of a package as possible, or a vehicle that can carry as many of those packages possible to deliver which is a saying that we used to have: when in doubt, throw lots. So the more you can have of something when using bombers, just, carpet bombing someone with, 1,000 bombs, you can have 500 in this wing and 500 in that wing, which each bomb has the capability of a non-nuclear material. I call it a non-nuclear material that has the megaton power between 1 and 5 megatons for a bomb that's no bigger than a motorcycle.
Great. Now, can you describe what actual duties and missions you performed while you were serving on these different types of fighters?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly, like I said, patrol, and depending on if someone runs away or attacks you, you're engage or pursue, and file reports and let people know what's happening. So it's a lot of what you're doing is being the eyes and ears of the main ship, as far into the range that it considers to safely extend you as fingers to scan and sense with what's going on out there, and also to protect and defend the perimeter if there's anything out there. So I'd say 99% of my activity as a pilot was just that, the daily mundanity of patrolling and either chasing or engaging things that ran away or wanted to fight. And 1 or 2 times really was participated in bombing missions, because it was, they needed the pilots, to be honest. And so mostly what I did was, small craft as a fighter pilot. And then when they needed extra pilots, then, they would tell us to, hey, you're on bomber duty and let's go blow something up. But there was like really only 2 times that I can think of that I actually got to fly a bomber as an active officer outside of flight school.
Mhm. And were there interactions with different ET civilizations as far as you could tell, or was it always just intercepting or engaging with different craft and you not being familiar with who was inside?
That's a good question, actually. There was a diplomatic corps that was assigned to the ship that we, like I said, had very little contact with because they were in the nose section. But occasionally escorting a diplomatic vehicle to a site where they would meet with another vehicle and, engage in some form of communication or dialogue, and then escort them back. That did happen from time to time. That was probably another fairly regular activity that we would get up to. We didn't see much as that part of our job. You didn't see much of, you know, people getting out of vehicles to communicate with each other. Most of what we would see is either vehicles coming, close to each other in order to communicate, or, often edge to edge in order to communicate. Now, I will say there were once or twice when we would escort the vehicle and someone from the diplomatic corps would spacewalk tethered from their vehicle to someone who would spacewalk tethered from their vehicle, and they would come, nearly face to face to communicate, floating out there in space, doing a little tethered spacewalk to each other. That happened a couple of times, but they're usually wearing pretty covered spacesuits like we do, so not really getting to see much of what's under there. But proportion-wise, there were a couple of them that were easily 9 or 10 feet tall. So they were not our size for sure. They were way taller, but just still in what you would consider a basic kind of bipedal humanoid suit, with a helmet on it. So couldn't see much what was going on under there, but they were tall.
I see. Can you describe how the Nautilus was actually run? Who was in command? Was it a general, an admiral? Was it run more in the tradition of the Air Force or the Navy?
That's a good question, and it was like a Navy command structure in that the captain was a O6 captain, with like a Navy captain, as opposed to other, O3 captains. Like I was an O3 captain because I was in this air wing as a Marine, but the command structure of the Nautilus was a little more like Navy structure. So the captain was like an O6 captain, and his name was Captain Kirkland. Um, what was his first name? Did I ever? No, it was written down on a couple of plaques somewhere. What was it? Captain Roger L. Kirkland.
And with officials like that, do you know, were they similarly serving 20 years, or was it a more indefinite purpose or indefinite length of service for more senior officials?
I got the impression that a lot of the command officers were in this for life. That they would be doing this until they were no longer physically, mentally capable of doing it, and their term of service was up. I did tend to get that impression. It was not so much, again, things that are people were pretty good about keeping their compartmentalized information compartmentalized. So, when you ask questions or want to know things from people that's outside your area, people are just pretty clear and friendly enough to go, well, that's this area and that's not your area, and you're just kind of okay, because that's just the way it is. And so there wasn't something that if ever came up, like how, when someone would say, oh, yeah, you're lucky you get to go back, in a few years or after you're done. And, well, how long are you in for? And they go, they kind of roll their eyes or give you that look. And, well, can't really tell you, but probably be here till I'm dead. And you get little comments like that. They gave me the impression that they were there for way longer.
I see. How many of these IG Highliner ships were in existence or belonged to the EDF?
Do not know. I do not know. The most I've ever seen in one place at one time was five. When five of us were congregated in the same place together at one time, but I have no idea what the total number is. That's again outside my area, and no one would tell me what that number. I would hear names sometimes, but I have no idea. Yeah, I just don't know. Wish I knew.
Mhm. In terms of just general knowledge of how the space command was run, or this parallel space command, did you get to talk to other officers about, who were the senior people in charge of this kind of parallel governmental military structure? Was there a president? Was there a coordinator?
That's a very good question, and um, they were pretty specific. In we get everything in our intelligence briefings, pretty much as far as what we know about anything and everything comes in those intelligence briefings, and our command briefings, which are our air wing commanders. Those briefings were pretty much limited to technical information and updated information about the vehicles or piloting protocols and uh, anything that was really specifically related to the air wing and our job as pilots. His job as a commander was really limited to just that. And so it was really about information or knowledge came from the intelligence officers and intelligence briefings. And they were really specific about what they wanted us to know and what they didn't want us to know. But there was a different sense, I'll have to say, here at this stage than when I was in the MDF on the ground, which was a lot more tight-lipped when I was in the MDF. And being on the Nautilus, things were a little looser, and people were a little less rigid and kind of prickly about it. And so you could sometimes get a little more information or feel like, that you were well, okay, we don't want you to stress out, worrying about that. So I'd rather give you an answer so you can put your head to rest about that question, kind of a thing, than have you, stressing about something that you don't know. So sometimes they would feel like they'd rather tell you if they could than not. But certain things that was clear, they had, instructions that was not in our need to know, and we were not supposed to know that. So we didn't get to know that. So you would often hear things referred to pretty much as the brass wants. The brass wants this, or the committee wants this, or, they might say the politicians back home want. So people were kind of referred to in these very generic and general terms. I don't recall anyone ever saying the president says or the president wants or Congress says or Congress wants or the UN says or the UN wants. It was always more vague terms and vague names than that. So I really don't know beyond my command structure where it went above that. I only had one time that I got called in front of Captain Kirkland. I had to go sit in front of the old man for a captain's mast one time, and it was not pleasant or not fun, and he punished me pretty good. I don't even want to talk about it. But he was not a bad person, not a bad guy. I had done something that was deserved to be punished for, and maybe he went overboard on what he decided was my punishment should be, but I'm not saying that I did something that I didn't fully deserve, that I needed to be reckoned for. But all my other interactions or knowing about him, he was a decent guy, a good guy. I otherwise liked him and thought that he was a decent captain. But can't say that I ever got any positive information about anything that was happening above him other than when he would make surly faces at, at the goddamn brass upstairs, he would just, the goddamn brass upstairs was how he referred to them.
Mhm. Can you describe your knowledge of what was happening on Earth during that, actually during the entire 20 years that you were on the Mars Defense Force and Earth Defense Force? Were there newspapers? Were there any kind of digital communications? Did you have things like computers that you could just log on and find out what was happening?
No, in fact, all information about what was going on Earth, newspapers, media, all of that was strictly forbidden. And any possession or knowledge of such things or communication or talking about such things could be met with pretty severe punishments. It was not what we were supposed to be, have any, essentially it was made very clear to us, look, if you're thinking about what's happening back home, you're not going to be thinking about your job. We need you 100% here on your job right now. And the only thing you need to think about home are the fond memories you have of it and that you want to go back to. They were pretty specific about that's all they wanted us to think about. Fond memories we had and that we were going to, fond memories that we're going to want to go back there, but no newspapers, no new media, no television, broadcasts or anything. In fact, we our radios and our vehicles could pick up the FM and radio and television transmissions coming from Earth. They're sophisticated and sensitive enough you could dial them in, but we're not allowed to. And so we could scan frequencies, listening for things, but we were not allowed to, to stop and tune in to a radio or a television frequency. And if you got caught doing that, you could get in big trouble.
I see. So now we're basically towards the end of your 20 years service. You've served approximately 3 years with the Earth Defense Force on the space or air wing. So what happened towards the end? I mean, you're about to finish your 20 years service. Was there a special ceremony? What actually transpired, and then what brought you back to the Earth?
Sure. Yeah, when we were done, it was fairly unceremonious day on the Nautilus when it was like, okay, you, and you're going home. You're done. And you're kind of like, oh, really? I am? Okay, great, I'm done. And then everyone who's done, they put you on a shuttle and send you back to Lunar Operations Command for a debrief and the time that you have to go to the medical center and do the whole age reversing process and all that. But yeah, before all that, you get back to Lunar Operations Command. There's a debrief on here's what you know about what you just did for the last 20 years. Here's what you don't know. Here's what we're going to fill in some gaps for you if that helps you, but may not matter because you might not remember this, after a couple weeks from now, because we're going to, for national security reasons, suppress all of your memories and you probably won't remember a thing, but don't worry, we'll take care of you, we'll take care of it, blah, blah, blah. It was always lots of reassurances that turned out to not be very true, but there were always lots of reassurances that, hey, don't worry about it, you'll be fine, kind of a thing. But after the debriefing, we kind of were escorted to an area of temporary quarters, which were a lot nicer than the temporary quarters that, the little teeny dorm rooms that we were in when we showed up. These were kind of nicer officer quarters. And then we were, essentially told to freshen up and shave and clean up and then put on your dress uniforms, and that there was going to be a big ceremony and there was going to be a banquet and lots of people were going to be there. There was going to be dignitaries and people from Earth, and there was going to be a special guest speaker, blah, 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 blah. And so we went to the end ceremony banquet, which was held in this, it was a good sized corner of what I would have to say must be a pretty big surface of the moon, so that most of the entire one side, this very large, tall, thick glass was exposed, so you could see the lunar surface and you could see space. And it was quite a view, quite a view. And then otherwise, just a very large space set up with tables, like a banquet space, round tables everywhere, and a little dais stage, with a podium and like a regular banquet ceremony. And everyone had designated seats where you're supposed to sit, and we had good food. It was yummy food. And then we had a few people come in and say nice words to us about, thank you for your service. And, long, poetic. I don't want to belittle people's words, but in some cases, some of these pomp and circumstances, these ceremonies are, more for the people to feel good, pat themselves on the back and feel good about themselves for what they've done, and try and make you feel less the sting of everything terrible or horrible you've had to live or go through, in order to somehow feel, oh, it was all worth it or okay. And I just have to say, I think we were all happy to be done. So the fact that we were all okay with it and took the pat on the back was because we were finished and it was over. So irregardless of whether we felt proud or good or completely messed up and traumatized about our entire tour of duties, we certainly, we're just thrilled to be done. And so it was a very it was an up and a high moment. Everyone was very happy. There was lots of laughing and lots of, pats on the backs and loud conversation of people being really thrilled to be over. So the energy was very high in the room, and they certainly wanted you to feel really good about you were done. And there was lots of, give them everybody a hand and that kind of thing. And I don't have a good recollection of who the first two speakers were. There were nobody that I knew, but apparently people who were in the new sort of covert, hierarchy of people who were supposed to be important. An older gentleman and an older woman. When I say older, I just mean somewhere probably between 55 and 65 based on their physical appearance, skin, hair, so forth. And then the last person who came out and gave us our farewell, thank you, the big speech was Donald Rumsfeld. I was a little surprised about that. And so, whatever his level of interaction, he knows something, and he's been involved at some level because he was there to give us all a pat on the back and say thank you very much and good job, and then goodbye.
Oh, that's very interesting because this ceremony, presumably that took place around 2007, in kind of the chronological years from the 20 years when you joined
Correct.
up in 1987. So I'm not sure if Rumsfeld was, or maybe he had just retired as Secretary of Defense. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and and either reason might have been why he was there. He might not have been there if he was, still Sec Defense, and that he might have been there because now he was retired. And maybe being retired as Sec Defense, maybe he got another promotion in the covert branch. I don't know, but he was there certainly because he's a top guy somewhere. He'd been there if he wasn't.
Right. So you know you're about to have your memories wiped after this ceremony. Was there anything in particular that you experienced during that 20 years of service that you at the time thought, well, I would really like to remember this?
Yeah, one thing. Um, I my third year in the MDF, um, a fresh recruit that arrived and part of our division and part of our squad, who was someone who I hated instantly, but within a year we were pretty much madly in love with each other, and we broke regulations and we got married. And my wife was a pretty incredible special person, and you can't. Um, I don't know any way to try and describe the kind of bond that you have with someone who is a person who is there with you side by side, fight after fight, battle after battle, who is willing to both kill and die for you and shows you that with their actions on a daily basis. Um, so we were really close and we loved each other a lot. And losing her was, the worst day of my life. Um, and we were, I knew her for 15 years um, total. And no, I'm sorry, that was not correct. We were married for 10 and I knew her for 12 and a half. And then she died. She took a projectile to the back of the head and died in my arms. And as sad as that made me and as upset as that made me, I never wanted to forget her. And so the one thing that I probably, fretted about that I did not want to forget. And if anything, I set that memory and that mental engram in my mind at that time. I think I thought about it a lot, that, okay, of all the things that I want to forget and that I'm okay with forgetting, I never want to forget her. And so, as I think the laws of physics would have it, when I started having flashback memories and there were lots of things that were bursting up, the one thing that really became the thread that allowed me to get into that very, very like protected and forbidden area of memory was my memory of her. So being able to actually be able to remember her was really the first real solid thing that I remembered and was able to pull out of that and had to re-grieve over for and lose her all over again for. But it was good because I had never really gotten to do that. I never really got to grieve for her. I was in a war zone, and so she died, and as sad and as broken up as I was about that, I had to go fight the next day. I couldn't just stop. And then being completely separated from that whole ground experience by being able to shift, and become a pilot, and being separated again by the second worst day in my life, which was losing, my entire division. That was a pretty strong buffer between any ability to grieve for her. So it was a pretty necessary thing to do, and I guess I'm glad that I got to do it and get through it. But it was rough. It was really hard. But I never wanted to forget her. I never, ever, 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 ever wanted to forget her, and it turns out that I didn't. And so that's, of all the things, to be honest, of all the things that I could give or take about my entire experience, I would never, ever want to give or redo knowing my wife, ever.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, and that pretty much wraps up this part of the interview, and we'll come back and just finish up with any final comments about what happened with the regaining of your memories when you returned to Earth after the age regression and the wiping of the memories.